This is the Nikon Z 40mm f2 lens. It is a really compact, fast, full-frame prime lens for the Nikon Z mirrorless cameras. The focal length is just between 35 and 50mm, which means if you pick this lens, you don't even have to choose between a 35 and 50mm lens anymore. The price of this lens is also very affordable. It's even a bit cheaper than the Viltrox 35 1.8 lens that I reviewed recently. So it sounds like a perfect lens, but it just sounds too good to be true. So let's have a look at everything about this lens and see whether it is a great lens for Nikon Z camera users or not. Kia ora, good morning everyone, Rich Wong here, welcome back to the channel. Today we are going to have a look at this Nikon Z 40mm f2 lens, and as usual, let's start the review by looking at the design and build quality of this lens first. First thing I want to mention about this lens is the size. The size of this lens is a lot smaller than most other Nikon Z lenses. I won't call it a pancake lens because it is still a little bit taller than the typical pancake lens, but maybe I can call it a cupcake lens as it is still really compact. And the weight of this lens is also very lightweight. It is only 170 grams. If you compare it with this DX 16-50 kit lens, and even in the fully collapsed form, the 40mm f2 lens is only slightly bigger than this kit lens. So that means if you want to use this 40mm f2 lens on a smaller DX Z mount camera, it would be perfectly suitable as well if you want to have a lightweight compact setup. This lens has a really simple optics design. There are only 6 elements in 4 groups. From memory, I don't remember any modern Nikon lens that has such a simple optics design. So it will be interesting to see if it affects the image quality in any way when we look at the image quality test results later on in this review. The design of this lens is also very basic. There are no switches, buttons or any fancy feature available, and it has a plastic rear lens mount, which is also not too surprising considering the very affordable price of the lens. However, I would say the overall build quality of this lens is still pretty good. I was thinking it would be pretty plasticky because of the price, but it is not, and it is reasonably good quality, but at the same time I won't say it has a very premium build quality. One interesting thing though is that it is a weather sealed lens. I was completely not expecting that at all, to be honest, because of the price, but I'm certainly not complaining. The focus ring is about half the depth of the lens, and if you don't need to do manual focus, you could assign it to control something else. Also, unlike a lot of other budget or compact lenses that the front element would usually extend quite a bit when you are focusing, this Nikon 40mm f2 lens is an internal focus lens, so the overall dimensions wouldn't change when you are focusing. Just like most other latest lenses, this Nikon 40mm lens also has a stepping autofocus motor. The autofocus speed is good. It feels very snappy even when you are shooting under low light. Of course, it works with the face or eye autofocus, and that works very well even with my Nikon Z6. The autofocus operation is also pretty quiet, but not exactly silent. I will talk about that a little bit more in the video filming section later on in this review. This lens has a minimum focus distance of 0.29 meter, and that will give you 0.17 times maximum magnification ratio. 0.29 meter sounds quite close, but because this is not a very long lens at all, so even when you are focusing at the minimum focus distance, there is still quite a bit of distance between the front element and your subject, which means you won't easily cast shadow on your subject. And if you want to light up your subject using external light, you can easily do that as well. So is this a sharp lens? Let's have a look at the center image sharpness first. At the maximum aperture f2, the center of this Nikon Z 40mm f2 lens is already very sharp, and also it has very good contrast. While stopping down to f2.8 or f4 could increase the center sharpness a bit, the difference is quite small. Corner at f2 is a bit soft, and you can see a bit of glow effect around the high contrast area. But for a lens at this price point, I think it is not too bad. And once you stop down the lens to f2.8, then the corner sharpness now becomes pretty decent. All the glow effects gone, and the contrast also becomes much better. Stopping down to f4, and the corner now becomes very sharp. Bokeh from this 40mm f2 lens is smooth and round even when you stop down the lens a bit. Sometimes there is a bit of highlight at the edge of the bokeh balls, but overall the bokeh looks pretty soft and not too distracting. Because the minimum focus distance of this lens is quite close, so if you want to use this lens to do some close-up photography or food photography, etc., you can render a nice and soft out-of-focus background very easily. If you disable the vignette control from your camera, and when you shoot at the maximum aperture f2, there is some quite noticeable light fall off near the edge of the photo. Stopping down the lens to f2.8 would minimize that a lot, and by f4, vignetting is not really obvious at all. But of course, you could turn on the vignette control to minimize light fall off as well. I remember when I reviewed some of the Nikon Z f1.8 lenses, I was really blown away by how little chromatic aberration those lenses has, even when I was shooting some of the really high contrast photos. With this 40mm f2 lens, the amount of chromatic aberration is quite a low level, but it's also not exactly as good as those more expensive f1.8 Z lenses. I can see a small amount of color fringing in some of my high contrast test photos, but in most of my real world photos, I usually don't really see much color fringing at all. So in terms of chromatic aberration, I think it is good, but it's just not perfect. When it comes to distortion, this Nikon Z 40mm f2 lens has pretty minimal amount of distortion. Even for my boring brick wall test photo, I still don't really see much distortion at all, so it shouldn't be a problem even if you want to use it to shoot some architectural photos or any photo that has lots of straight lines in it. As one of the cheapest Z lens from Nikon, it's not really surprising that this lens doesn't have the anneal or nano coating. But what surprised me is the lens flare performance of this lens is actually pretty decent. Even when I'm shooting directly into some bright light source or shooting into the sun, I get quite minimal amount of lens flare. And another thing is, the lens doesn't come with any lens hood, and even without any lens hood, when I'm taking photo on a bright sunny day in the middle of the day, when the sun is just above or in front of me slightly, I still don't get any lens flare issue or the contrast doesn't drop. So overall, the lens flare performance of this lens is actually very decent, and this is one thing that shows the difference between a well-established optics company like Nikon compared with a lot of the smaller and newer third-party lens manufacturer. With this 40mm lens, you need to stop down the lens to around f5.6, then you could start to see a bit of SUNSTARS in the photo. When you stop down the lens to the minimum aperture f16, you can get some reasonably clean 18-point SUNSTARS. At the maximum aperture f2, there is quite a bit of COMA at the corner of the photo. Stopping down to f2.8 improves it quite a bit, but I do need to stop down further to f4, then COMA is not really noticeable. So yeah, if you want to use this lens to do some astrophotography, be prepared you will need to stop down this lens a bit if you don't want to have noticeable COMA in your photo. Continuous autofocus when shooting video seems to be a little bit slower compared to the average Z lenses. So when you are filming scenes that changes very quickly, it does take slightly longer time to catch up the autofocus than I expected. I mentioned earlier that the autofocus of this lens is quiet, but it's not exactly silent. But that is mainly about when you are taking photos when the autofocus speed is a lot faster. When doing video filming, I hear virtually no autofocus noise at all, even when I'm doing the filming in this really quiet room. So it shouldn't be a problem even if you are recording audio using the built-in microphone. Focus breathing is quite noticeable with this lens. If you look at this sample video and look at the brick wall on the left side of the video, you can see the breathing quite easily as I step in and out of the frame. Compared with most other Nikon Z prime lenses, a few things are obviously missing with this 40mm f2 lens. We have a plastic rear lens mount. The lens does not come with any lens hood. There's no switches or buttons on the lens, and overall the lens looks a bit budget. But of course, with the really affordable price, Nikon has to do a few things to cut the cost, and these are some pretty sensible things to do to help reduce the price. Now, do I want this lens to have a metal lens mount? Yes, sure I do. And do I want this lens to come with a nice lens hood? Oh yes, definitely. Would I be happy to pay a little bit more for those things? Yes, I think I do. But Nikon does not create this lens specially for me. It's a lens to fill a gap in their current lens lineup, something that I also feel missing from the beginning. A fast, compact, affordable, reasonably good image quality lens that people would buy and take with them every day to take photos or video. And this is exactly what this Nikon Z 40mm f2 lens is. And to be fair, Nikon has also included a few features that most other lenses at this price point wouldn't have. For example, the weather seal and also internal focus. Image quality wise, it is not as perfect as the Nikon Z mount 1.8 prime lenses, but I think for most users, they will be perfectly happy with the image quality from this lens. And I know I would. So while it's not technically perfect lens, I think it is one of the most important Z mount lens that Nikon has released so far. Sometimes a good enough lens is better than a perfect lens, and this is a very good example. This lens just strikes a great balance between price, size, and performance. It is a lens that pretty much any Nikon Z shooter should consider, no matter when they are buying their first Nikon mirrorless camera or they just want to add a fast prime lens. And I think this is also a lens that could make people consider Nikon instead of another brand. And if Nikon is going to release a full frame version of their ZFC camera, a special edition of this 40mm f2 lens would be the perfect kit lens for it.